Hey everyone, Tactics here, and with the whirlwind of information about patch 11.2 over, I wanted to kind of sit down and go through all of the major changes coming for all 6 of the tank specs, including various talent adjustments, removed and added abilities, and of course, both hero trees tier bonuses with 2 coming for every single spec. As a reminder here, number tuning usually does not happen during the first few weeks of testing, so the values on things like abilities, tier sets, and talents is pretty irrelevant at this point, and it can and will change over the course of the PTR cycle. So I'm not going to be focusing on exact numbers in this video, instead just the actual effects themselves. Another thing to note about the PTR servers is that they've been pretty unstable so far, so I haven't been able to do a full set of testing on everything yet myself, so I may be slightly off when it comes to the exact functionality of certain tier sets or new talents, so just be aware. With all that said, let's start with alphabetical order here, which means blood DKs are up. And right off the bat, we have some pretty impactful removals and adjustments to the Death Knight class. So right here, you can see Abomination's Limb is gone. Their note on this is that it kind of trivialized gripping in general. And so that's no longer going to be a talent option. It literally was just removed from the tree. Blood DKs obviously still have Gore Fiends and the Silencing Grasp in their talent tree, so they're still the best DK at gripping, so they still have an advantage over the other DK specs. The other change here, significant change, was to Anti-Magic Zone. This is now baseline down to a 6-second duration and a 15% DR, but it's no longer capped, which is obviously a bigger buff to the non-blood spec since the blood DK had a bigger cap, but it's much more intuitive. It's a 4-minute base cooldown here, but you can take Assimilation, the talents in your tree, which has been changed to reduce the CD by 60 seconds down to a 3-minute cooldown and increase the duration by 2 seconds up to 8 seconds, which I'm guessing if you're going to be using AMZ, you're going to be taking this talent 100% of the time. So positives and negatives for Blood DK specifically, but generally I think AMZ is going to be a pretty powerful cooldown if you can get value out of that full duration. The other thing is around Death and Decay gameplay, where on Holy Ground, which was that haste buff while in your Death and Decay, has been removed and it's replaced with this new talent, which is just 2% haste at all times. So a little bit less overall value here, of course, but it's at all times instead of playing around Death and Decay, so a little bit less feels bad if you're not in your Death and Decay for any moment. Now, there's also a couple changes here to the hero trees themselves, which are worth mentioning. Starting with Deathbringer, the first scythe has been changed. The RNG of it applying a Reaper's Mark sometimes, that's just been taken out of it entirely. And for Blood, it's now a 25% chance to summon Dancing Rune Weapon for 6 seconds. So this is going to be a DPS hit because, you know, the Reaper's Mark was obviously more valuable offensively. But it is interesting. I think the chance is maybe a little bit low. It's still like a little inconsistent in terms of it giving you defensive value, but this is kind of what Blood wants. More stuff in this direction for a Mythic Plus environment and helping to shore up some of those weaknesses. So I'm interested in this effect. I think maybe the percent chance needs to be increased a little bit, but I like this idea. I like what Blizzard is cooking with this specifically. Sand Lane has also received some differences. So Blood Beast is now a static thing on your Dancing Rune Weapon. And the reasoning behind this is just the exact same here as the Exterminate changes and Reaper's Mark. It's just, it's too swingy. It's too RNG in terms of your damage output. And they're trying to tone back on that. So it's not always going to spawn your Dancing Rune Weapon. It's more consistent that way, and they've reduced the damage of Blood Beast as well on top of that. The other thing here, little boost, Infliction of Sorrow. So this is going to be when your Dancing Rune Weapon ends, you're going to gain a charge of Death and Decay. So a little bonus there sometimes. This isn't always going to be super valuable, but it is valuable sometimes. So it's a nice little boost there as well. Now let's talk about the Blood DK tier set bonuses, which are going to be paired with all of these changes. And for those who don't know, the tier set bonuses are somewhat spec based, but they're really based around the hero trees. And so, like, for example, here, Frost and Blood Deathbringer are very similar effects, just with abilities for Blood and abilities for Frost. So, speaking of Deathbringer, casting Reaper's Mark grants 2 stacks of Exterminate with 150% on that first scythe, which is the single target scythe, and 125% bonus on the second scythe, which is the AoE scythe. This is very, very interesting to me because this paired with that Deathbringer change here, which I was talking about, where the first Scythe has a chance to give you Dancing Rune Weapon for 6 seconds, all of a sudden means that when you press Reaper's Mark, assuming it's a regular Reaper's Mark, not a short CD Reaper's Mark, you're going to get a total of 4 Exterminates. So 2 up front, and then 2 once the Reaper's Mark detonates, which gives you 4 chances, at this 25% Dancing Rune Weapon every time you press Reaper's Mark. This is really cool. This is, again, moving more in that direction of like, hey, having a bit more Dancing Rune Weapon uptime, having a bit more, defensive uptime in general and keys is very, very useful for Blood DK specifically. And this really feeds into that a little bit, on top of course, giving you just more scythes, which are the cool thing. And of course, you're going to be casting Marrow Rend a lot more, and it's going to be discounted. So it's a lot more scything, which is what is cool about Deathbringer. The 4-piece here, Reaper's Mark can stack up to 15 additional times, and it increases your critical strike chance by 10% after it explodes for 8 seconds. So those last 2 Exterminate casts are going to have that extra crit chance, and the Reaper's Mark is going to deal more damage to the prior target, and of course blow up for a bigger AoE damage. Overall, this is kind of whatever. I'm definitely much more interested in this 2-piece bonus. This is way, way cooler to me, particularly if we're looking at a Mythic Plus environment. Moving on to Sand Lane, Infliction of Sorrow extends the duration of your disease by an additional 3 seconds on your priority target, and Essence of the Blood Queen additionally increases your mastery by 0.8% per stack. So that's now haste and mastery. It's a little bit less mastery, but it's still mastery. It's just free stats with your stacks, so that's nice. And this is going to be more priority target damage when you end up blowing your disease up on your main target here, especially at the end of your Dancing Rune Weapon window. Speaking of the Dancing Rune Weapon window, 4 set, Blood Beast lasts for an additional 4 seconds, so a bigger boom, and again, that's always spawned by your Dancing Rune Weapon. And Vampiric Strike increases the melee attack power of your Dancing Rune Weapon by 5% for 6 seconds, and this overlaps similar to Iron Fur. I'm not sure what this is going to actually translate to in terms of the damage output, because obviously the later stacks are going to be partially wasted because your Dancing Rune Weapon is going to end, and how things work. Does it like stack up building into a Dancing Rune Weapon before you've cast it? I'm not really sure, but all in all, this is going to make your Dancing Rune Weapon window do quite a bit of damage. It's going to be a pretty hefty burst window for Sand Lane, which is cool. It's kind of doubling down on what Sand Lane already does. So in that sense, it's maybe a little bit boring because it's not really as impactful rotationally as something like the Deathbringer tier set, which I think this 2-piece might be one of my favorite 2-pieces out of all the tank 2-pieces. As a little bit of a spoiler alert there. Moving on, Vengeance Demon Hunter. There's nothing to look at in here. There's 0 talent changes for Vengeance Demon Hunter, so we're going to skip and talk straight about the actual set bonuses. So, Aldraki Reaver, Reaver's Glaive damage is increased by 60%, and other physical only damage increased by 30%. They have to do physical only here to basically make it not affect all the fell stuff, which is all damage schools. So physical only stuff, I believe, is, ballpark like 40% of their overall damage from what I was looking through logs and stuff. So it's a pretty substantial portion of Aldraki Reaver's damage specifically. The 4-piece here, Fury of the Eldraki, further empowers Soul Cleave when it's cast the second in the combo, basically. So it's going to do 12 slashes, and this is up from the baseline 6 slashes if it's second, so it doubles it. Reaver's Mark now also stacks up to 3 times, and then it's also further empowered if it's the second cast, implying 3 stacks for 100% of normal duration. So, that's all the way up to a 21% damage amp on the target, up from 14% from gaining a stack. And my understanding is this just means it's the normal duration. I don't think this is double duration. I believe this just means it's the normal duration. I'm not sure why it's there, but still, this is a pretty potent 4-piece for Aldraki Reaver. You're going to be cleaving a lot, and you're going to be having a higher damage amp and maintaining that. And so if you're able to maintain the high damage amp, and then you get some more hunts or whatever, and or more soul spent, you're able to like kind of back these and do a 12 slash into a 3 damage amp to a 12 slash. That's a lot of damage. It's also going to be a lot of AoE damage with all these slashes going out. So I think Aldraki Reavers are probably pretty happy with the combo of these bonuses. This is a pretty high throughput bonus. Again, I'm not really sure it changes how you play, but I think that's a pretty common theme with a lot of these bonuses. They just kind of double down on what the hero tree already does, and they don't really change it up. There's some, unique scenarios like the Deathbringer one I mentioned, but a lot of them don't impact how you think about the hero talent tree much at all. Moving on to Felsguard, Immolation Aura deals 30% increased damage and increases Soul Cleave damage by 30% while active. Again, just another kind of passive damage increase to these other abilities. And then entering Demon 4 now immediately induces Demon Surge, so boom, big AoE damage immediately. And it's going to also shatter a Demon Soul Fragment that grants 20% increased damage for 15 seconds. So basically, every single Demon Surge you do from Feldev and from meta is going to be 20% increased damage on top of all the abilities also doing 20% increased damage. So this is, again, pretty hefty throughput increase from these Demon Hunter 4-piece bonuses. They're pretty powerful. I think if you're just looking at throughput, you're probably going to be pretty happy with how these are. But again, just like the Eldrazi Reaver, you're not really going to think about either of these bonuses very much. Immo Aura is going to be very, very high uptime, so you're just going to mostly have this available. May push Soul Cleave up the priority a little bit over Spirit Bomb slightly, but in general, these are just kind of flat damage bonuses. You're going to be pumping a little bit more while playing the same. Moving on, we've got Guardian Druid, some very minor talent adjustments in the general tree for Druid. So Lycera's Meditation is gone. This was the talent that was getting abused a little bit. This was where you retained some stats when you shifted. So I think it was like crit when you shifted into cat form, verse when you shifted into bear form. This was nice for Druid of the Claw, but it's now being removed because it was a bit toxic for like Boomkins and Resto Druid and stuff like that, which is fair. It's replaced now with these other like non-damage oriented passive gains. So in bear form, you're just going to have a flat 5% move speed if you take this talent. If you're cat shifting, you're going to have 4% bonus stamina in cat form. Pretty minor. Honestly, you might avoid this talent most of the time, but a 5% move speed boost is not bad, but it's in the capstone area. So, it's going to be a talent you're much more happy to drop now as opposed to what it was previously, where Druid of Claw, you wanted that talent at all times. To my dismay, that is the end of the Guardian Druid changes. So again, like Demon Hunter, let's go look at the tier set bonuses. Druid of the Claw. Ravage increases your haste by 10%, chance to crit by 10%, and your bleed damage by 30% for 5 seconds. And then on your 4-piece, Ravage has a 40% chance to make your Ravage your target again, 4 seconds later at 60% effectiveness. This is, again, not interesting, but potentially very, very powerful. It does kind of double down on Druid of the Claw being Giga in Incarn. Your Incarn does a ton of damage. Again, very similar to like Venthyr Guardian back in the day. You're going to do a ton of damage. This will be like perma up in Incarn for sure. You're going to have a ton of Ravages. Ravage will also recast itself often because you're ravaging so much. It's a decently high chance. It's still RNG, so I'm not like that happy about it. We'll see how it actually ends up playing. But, you're going to get a decent number of this just because of the quantity of Ravages is going to be so high. I believe also currently there is a bug. It doesn't scale with the Ruthless Aggression talent, which is the attack speed increase when you Ravage. So this like free Ravage doesn't refresh that buff. So I assume that's a bug, but that'll be quite powerful in terms of passive throughput if that is true. And it'll just generally give you more Ravage procs overall. More Ravage procs means that dreadful wound uptime, which is also a DR, is going to be higher, but it still kind of has a similar issue where you need to rely on RNG in like a Mythic Plus scenario to actually get rolling, and it just lacks consistency defensively compared to Elun's Chosen. But in a raid environment, this is probably going to bump. This is probably going to do quite a bit of damage if I had to guess, especially if they fix that bug where it currently doesn't scale with the attack speed increase. If this gives the attack speed increase as second Ravage, this is going to be very, very good in a raid environment. Moving on to Elun's Chosen. Again, doubling down on what Elun's Chosen already does. Thrash damage increased by 20%. Thrash has a 40% chance to launch a Star Surge at your target at 65% effectiveness. Then on impact, the Star Surge launched by Thrash splits to 3 additional targets at 20% effectiveness, so a bit more cleave. And then it grants a stack of Gathering Moonlight. Casting Lunar Beam consumes Gathering Moonlight to increase your damage by 5% per stack for 12 seconds. So again, there's definitely a focus here on, AoE and cleave with the Thrash and then the splitting Star Surge and stuff. There's a little bit of the prio damage from the initial Star Surge, but it definitely seems more focused on AoE and cleave, which is what Elun's Chosen is already good at, right? Druid of the Claw has like an over 20% lead when it comes to single target output, and this doesn't really do anything to shore that up, so it's going to remain like a Druid of the Claw raid thing, Elun's Chosen Mythic Plus thing. If I had to guess just based on this, even if they amp these numbers up drastically, it's not going to overcome that greater than 20% gap that currently exists between them. There is a little bit of interesting stuff here, I guess, like Star Surges are currently triggering the Lunation talent, which CDRs your Lunar Beam. So you're getting more Lunar Beam CDR from this, and you're obviously getting damage when you press Lunar Beam, but this isn't stacking up like too high because you're pressing Lunar Beam so frequently, but still it's a boost. It makes it even more consistent, right? You're gonna get more Lunar Beam, so you have more consistency in terms of the defensive benefits from Lunar Beam there. So it's gonna, again, really doubles down on the strengths it already has. It's probably going to be the Mythic Plus go-to. It's going to be really good Mythic Plus if I had to guess. But it's just not something you're going to think about. You're not going to play any differently. And that's kind of a gripe I have with the Guardian Druid tier bonuses. All four, these two, Season 1 and the Season 2, tier set bonuses, this expansion for Guardian, have just been these passive things that you don't really track. They don't really influence your rotation or have an impact on it. And they're a little disappointing, honestly, from someone who, is... historically, I played a lot of Guardian. Guardian's going to have a place in my heart. I don't currently main it, but I want to see the spec do well. And it is a little bit disappointing because for me personally, a big part of what I enjoy about tier set bonuses is the fact that they can change up your gameplay while still having the bulk of your spec feel the same between patches. And that just hasn't happened for Guardian. This expansion, I'm going to stop ranting before I go too far on this, but I am going to have a full, I think, Guardian Druid wish list video coming out in the next couple of weeks to just my thoughts on what I'd like to see change with the spec, whether that's later in this PTR cycle, which is unlikely, or moving into midnight. So make sure you do keep an eye out for that video. I'm not saying these tier bonuses are weak by any means. Like I said, I think they're probably going to be pretty strong, especially if they fix the bugs of things not interacting with these bonuses that probably should, but they're just very passive and they're just not interesting to me personally. But again, I'll rant more on that in that other video. Let's move on to Brewmaster Monks next, who did receive a few changes here. Moving down, there we are. Vivification, set it on the first try, let's go. Is now based off your Rising Sun kick instead of being a timer. I think that's, it's probably slightly better. I think it's probably shorter than the timer and the cooldown, but not too much of a change there. Otherwise, the talent changes, there's a few talent changes, only 3 new talents, a couple talents removed. And basically the goal of these talent changes were to smooth out their damage intake and also make Ox not totally useless and something you avoid, which makes sense as a cooldown that is like very iconic, right? And so in terms of what was removed, Celestial Flames, which I believe was like a 0% pick rate talent, maybe very low percent pick rate talent. So makes sense. Put something more useful there. And then Zen Med, which was a very niche cooldown. Kind of interesting, at sometimes on how it could be used to like cheese certain mechanics, but not widely used, and kind of contributed a bit to like button bloat and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's an iconic ability, sad to see it gone, but I think it's okay. I think the replacements are well worth losing Zen Med, in my opinion. So let's take a look at what they actually are and where they actually show up. I actually have a little side-by-side here. Technology. Move this up a little bit. So this is the current live talent tree, and this is the PTR talent tree. So most things are the same. Like I said, the tree is actually the exact same shape. The difference is here again, Celestial Flames over here in this corner is removed, and it's replaced with Nuzhal's Resolve. So healing spheres are now over 10 seconds, and their healing is increased by up to 80% based on your missing health. So can make them significantly larger and help them kind of offset your stagger, giving a bit of sustain. So that's a cool talent. Are you going to take it all the time? Probably not, but it is something cool that I think they were lacking a bit. And you're going to see they kind of all follow a similar theme to this. So another thing, just added as a choice node with Celestial Brew is Celestial Infusion. Basically the same thing, but instead of being a full absorb on you, it absorbs 20% of incoming damage. So again, another way to smooth damage intake as opposed to just plopping up a giant shield on your health and then that getting eaten up. So that could be very, very powerful in certain situations. Are there going to be situations where you probably prefer a big absorb shield? Yeah, most likely, but that is a cool option that I think is very welcome. Then we of course talked about Zen Med. It's gone. In its place, Zen State. The effectiveness of stagger is increased by up to 20% based on your missing health. This is going to depend on how well that scales. When do you get that max benefit? But could be interesting. Could be something you skip out on because it's not a ton of value, but I think the vast majority of the player base are going to get more value out of Zen State than they were getting out of Zen Meditation. So I'm not unhappy with this getting thrown in there. And again, caveat here, I am dumb when it comes to Brewmaster. I am not a Brewmaster main by any means, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. I've asked a few other Brewmaster players their thoughts on this, and it generally seems to be positive. It's not as drastic as some people wanted, but I think a lot of people, or a lot of people I've talked to, feel positive about the changes. So that's kind of where my view on this is coming from. Ox, it's a little bit different. It's mostly the same. Basically, you are healing Nuzhao now for your purified stagger, which I don't believe was happening before. It's still the same duration, 25 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. The walk with the Ox is now different. So this is now made into your damaging abilities have a chance to invoke Nuzhao, causing him to charge to your target's location and stomp. I don't know if he has to be already active for this to work. That is kind of my assumption, is that your Ox needs to be active either from invoke or from call to arms for this to actually trigger. But it would be interesting if you can just spawn the Ox. Sometimes he stomps and goes away, but I doubt that. I'm guessing it has to be only when your Ox is active. So this could be good depending on where the damage tuning is at. And then finally, improved Invoke Nuzhao is also different. It makes him stomp mightily and knock up enemies in the air. I don't know if there's much damage tied to this, but it's basically an extra CC. I'm not sure you're going to take this talent unless there is some damage tied to it. If it's like a really, really big burst damage hit and a knock up, then potentially you'll take it. But obviously it requires this 2-point node and then a 4th point to be invested. So I could see you avoiding this node if it's not too much damage and just an extra CC, because it's kind of expensive. It's in the capstone area, right, to actually get this CC portion. So it may not actually be worth it, but they are making an effort here to change up Nuzhao. He still potentially seems a little underwhelming for a 3-minute cooldown, but I'm going to have to see, testing how the actual numbers output has changed, how exactly Walk with the Ox works. Again, the synergy potentially with Call to Arms, because as we're going to see in a second here, Weapons of Order is going to see a bit of use here, depending on the hero tree, and that could be very, very useful. With Call to Arms, if you're getting more Ox, lots of Ox uptime is not bad. If it's a better Ox cooldown. And again, I think these 3 new talents are great additions. They're what Brewmaster wanted, and they help with some of the weaknesses, particularly in a Mythic Plus environment. Only downside I think I've heard is that there's still not really haste scaling for Brewmaster, which is a pretty significant downside. It's, I think a lot of specs have had issues with that in Windwalker historically, and then that got changed going into this expansion. So that is like the one thing they're missing, but I think good changes overall in terms of the talent stuff here for Brew. Now, let's go back into the tier set bonuses for Brew. Scrolling. Here we go at the top. So for Master of Harmony, gaining Vitality has an increasing chance to cause your next Tiger Palm to unleash a harmonic charge, dealing nature damage split between your target and nearby enemies, and also healing 5 allies. And then when you cast Celestial Brew, it guarantees you get 2 Tiger Palms that are going to trigger this amount of damage. So I am curious what the healing output here is. I assume it's not going to be significant, because Blizzard's never happy when tanks do a lot of off healing, especially if this is significant in a dungeon environment. But it could be a little bit niche utility, like after the Wildfire was back in Dragonflight for Guardian Druid, which could be interesting. Otherwise, it's just you get some procs for Tiger Palm. Tiger Palms do big damage. When you pop your damage window here with Celestial Brew, you get your 2 Tiger Palms, which are going to do that damage burst as well. So they're going to get amplified by using that damage pool. So, a little bit here, a little bit impactful rotationally with those Tiger Palm procs. Moving on to Shadowpan. Flurry Strikes deal 30% more damage, and activating Weapons of Order instantly grants 10 of those Flurry Strikes, and they trigger on your next attack at full effectiveness. So another way to actually spend those Flurry Strikes quickly, as opposed to just reaching that energy threshold. And then the Flurry Charge generation is increased by 100%, and Flurry Strikes triggers every 120 energy spent during Weapons of Order, as opposed to the 240, which is the regular energy threshold. So overall, this is going to be more uptime on some of those buffs related to spending Flurry Charges, like Against All Odds, which is that agility buff, as well as the Capstone, the Wisdom of the Wall buffs, whatever those are, the various ones you get. It's just going to be higher uptime on all of those buffs, which is definitely nice for Shadowpan. Again, a bit more passive here, a bit more tied to Weapons of Order, which with these changes, and again, potentially if you run that talent we were talking about earlier in the capstone area of the Brew Tree, could be another big burst CD. If you look at like the Sand Lane changes as well, right? It could be Weapons of Order just kind of absolutely owns everything, which could be cool. Playing that damage window. It seems like they're doing that a lot, right? Shadowpan's doing it, Sand Lane's doing it. Druid of the Claw is doing it. So it could be powerful, but again, I don't think it's going to change too much in terms of how you're actually playing. A lot of the buffs you're getting from spending these flurry strikes is just going to be passive boost like agility, like mastery or whatever it is from the wall buffs that you get. Pretty passive, right? From there, we've got the prots. So Protection Paladin, same boat as Vengeance Demon Hunter, where there's no actual talent changes whatsoever. So we're looking straight to the tier set bonuses. So Lightsmith, 2-piece hammer and anvil's damage is increased by 15%. This is the shockwave on your judgment crits. And it can also be activated by your main generator, Blessed Hammer or Hammer of the Righteous, at normal effectiveness. So now you have a second thing, which you are pressing quite frequently, that can also proc your hammer and anvil shockwave, and then it also deals more damage. This is a very, very nice 2-piece. This is very, very powerful. Very powerful. Now, hammer and anvil, when procs, also grants a stack of Masterwork. This causes your next Holy Armament to cast a lesser version of itself on a nearby ally for each stack. So if you cast Sacred Weapon with 4 stacks of Masterwork, the person who cast it on is going to get it, you're going to get it, and then 4 nearby allies, assuming there are 4 nearby allies, are going to get a lesser version of it. So I think like the lesser version of the bulwark is just a flat shield that doesn't grow, and the lesser version of the weapon is just for like a few attacks, not like a full duration. So they're lesser, but you can potentially buff up quite a bit of people. I think the max stacks right now is 5 on the PTR, which means you can buff a total of 7 people with 1 cast if you build up to 5. Obviously, there's also the crit synergy here with hammer and anvil, also proccing from a Blessed Hammer. You can basically, if you have enough crit, potentially every single cast of a sacred weapon or a bulwark is going to be duplicated multiple times onto people, which could be quite a bit of overall throughput. It will be interesting to see what the actual tuning values on this throughput are, but potentially very good if you're just like blanket buffing people with not even weapons only, but like the shields as well. Then we've got the Templar stuff here. So Empyrean Hammer deals 20% increased critical strike damage, and when it crits, there's a 50% chance to grant an extra stack of Light's Deliverance. That's those stacks that you need to get your free Hammer of Light. So again, more crit synergy here. This is probably a little bit better in terms of crit synergy because you're getting crit damage on the hammers, and then also more stacks, which is going to lead to more Hammers of Light. Speaking of more Hammers of Light, it deals more damage to the priority target. It hits more targets, so it's better in single target, it's better in AoE, and it can be cast an additional time after Eye of Tyr. This has a lot of impacts. 1, it's going to shoot down more Empyrean Hammers because you're casting it again. 2, and probably more importantly, it's going to make maintaining your Shake the Heavens buff significantly easier because you're going to get back-to-back casts to fully refresh and pandemic that duration immediately, which means you're going to maintain that buff for longer. You're going to have a higher uptime, which means you're going to have more Empyrean Hammers, which means you're going to have more Hammer of the Lights, and it's just this big feedback loop. So this is going to be pretty powerful. This is going to be pretty powerful in my opinion. Between both of them, obviously crit's going to gain a bunch of value, is already pretty valuable for paladins with these individual effects themselves. There was already crit effect in both trees, and now it's kind of doubling down on that, which is interesting. But yeah, paladins, get ready to stack a lot of crit. You're gonna be critting, but I think it'll be interesting to see which one of these pulls ahead. I'm leaning it's gonna be Templar because I think this is kind of insane, but potentially the AoE buffing of the 4-piece of Lightsmith, it could be very, very impactful, right? Finally, we have Protection Warrior. This is going to be our last tank, of course, and they have a ton of updates. Here we go. Boom. So they've done a kind of revamp of the Prot Warrior tree. It looks completely different. There's a ton of new talents. There's a bunch of removed talents. There's a bunch of reworked talents. So let's go down here first. Look about the removed talents initially. So Battering Ram, Champion's Bulwark. These are the shield charge adjustment talents. Battering Ram's just basically gone. Champion's Bulwark has been somewhat rolled in. They took the shield block and they made it baseline into shield charge, so it always just offers a shield block, but the rest of the bonuses from Champion's Bulwark are gone. Juggernaut, which is the stacking execute buff, is gone, but it's been replaced with the ability to cleave execute onto 2 other targets, which is kind of interesting. Show of Force, the revenge stuff is gone. And Spell Block, importantly, Spell Block has been removed, and I'm not a fan of their note here. So they said basically requires a lot of specialized knowledge to use, which isn't wrong. That's not wrong, but I disagree with that as the reasoning to take it away, because regular block has the same issues, right? Is a tank buster blockable? I don't know. Is this AoE hit blockable? I don't know. Probably not. Is periodic damage? No, but it's also inconsistent. Regular block is just inconsistent. I feel like this statement should instead be them making what is blockable more consistent and more obvious, as opposed to them just removing spell block, because block just functions the same. And they've added a couple things as like potential replacements for spell block, which really don't fit the void that this is leaving being removed. And I hope they reconsider this and instead opt to try and make what is blockable and what isn't a bit more consistent. Again, let's look at the talent trees, which we have up here. Boom, shifted. This is the old one. This is the new one. As you can see, very different here up at the top. It's, you know, an entirely different shape and stuff. So similar talents, some new talents. Disrupting Shout is here. Challenging Shout is baseline. So you don't need to worry about having a talent on that. They saved you some space there, but it's just a very different tree. Bloodborne is a little bit easier to get. It's over here, but it's very odd. There's a lot of dead ends in this tree, as you can see, like here, dead end, dead end, dead end, dead end, dead ends over here. It's not really intuitive in my opinion, and I think they need to cook a bit more with the shape of this tree. That would be my initial feedback. It needs some work, is my opinion. I think it's not super intuitive initially. The other changes probably notable. Tough as Nails no longer has an ICD, so it's going to be much better in terms of output in AoE situations. So that is potentially something interesting for Mythic Plus. The two talents I was talking about is here. I think Spellbreaker is just awful. We already hate RNG defensiveness as a tank. Making it such a low number and such a high DR, 100% on a 4% chance, I think is silly. It will see 0% play, and it should, because it's not good for a tank spec. That needs to be removed and replaced with something more useful, or just bring spell block back. Hunker Down, AoE effect damage reduced by 2%. Spell Reflect reduces magic gem taken by additional 10%. That'll be just what you take in all situations, but it's not a replacement for spell block by any means, right? Other stuff, there's a new execute damage. Here's that new execute talent I was talking about, heavy-handed. Hit up to 2 additional targets with your execute. Here's shield charge again, solo. There's nothing else beneath it, and it does give you that shield block. Baseline, there's a new Whirling Blade here, 5 ppm, and you proc 4 seconds of Ravager. Pretty interesting. You know, it's a little bit more consistent in terms of the rage gen, as opposed to Ravager, which is just that big burst on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So that could actually see play. I like that idea. They've kind of reduced the potency of some of these talents in the middle here. You know, they made Enduring Defense as a 2-point node, but, you know, there's, I think, literally no other 2-point nodes in the whole tree, just this one in the center. So I don't know if you can complain that much about it. And then there's just a lot of these other passive nodes, which, you know, here's 4% on D-Stance. Here's, where was it? Up here, 6% armor. Fight Through Their Flames is just nerfed a little bit, I think. 4% magic reduction on D-Stance, right? Well, a lot of those nodes. Again, I think they just need to recook on the shape a little bit, rethink their spell block choice or their options on replacing spell block, and yeah, just cook a little bit more with this tree. I think it's undercooked. It's certainly undercooked, and I think a lot of prop warriors are not happy with the current state of it, which I think is pretty fair. But there's some cool ideas here with heavy-handed and Whirling Blade. It's not all bad for sure, but needs some work. Definitely. Moving on to their tier set bonus. Scrolling. So Colossus Demolish damage increased by 20%, and critical strike damage abilities increased by up to 20% based on the number of Colossal Might stack. So adding to that, again, more crit damage synergy, which Colossus already had. More crit synergy in general, like Paladin's getting, and big demolish damage. So it's a pretty decent damage throughput. Again, doesn't really change how you're playing at all. And then demolish increases the critical strike chance of your next 2 shield slams by 100%, and then shield slam critical strikes increase your rend and deep wounds damage by 100% for 8 seconds. So again, more incentive to have crit in general to try and maintain this bleed buff, and potentially you're going to see Colossus do a ton of damage, especially with, like I showed you, the Bloodborne is much more accessible. 1 point and 25% damage to deep wounds and rend. And there's obviously already the built-in damage increase to deep wounds and rend in Colossus. And you're also getting this. They're going to be doing quite a bit of bleed damage. They're going to be stacking crit. It's going to be a lot of damage. So this is a pretty powerful set bonus. Again, doesn't really change how you play the spec. Then we have Mountain Thane. Thunderblast has a 35% chance to call down 5 ionizing strikes on affected targets, dealing nature damage. And then those strikes deal 50% more damage, and they have a 20% chance to charge, to give you Charge of Thunder Blast. So it's basically just fueling that feedback loop that is Mountain Thane. That Mountain Thane, you know, if you're playing it a lot in Season 1, you know, you're getting more Thunder Blast. Thunder Blast means you're getting Lightning Strikes. Lightning Strikes mean you're getting more Rage, and it gives you a chance to get those free Shield Slams back to back. And the Shield Slams have a chance to give you more Thunder Blast, and it's just this big feedback loop. So this just kind of, again, makes Mountain Thane more Mountain Thane-y, which I'm a fan of. I'm a Mountain Thane enjoyer for sure. I've had a good time playing Colossus this patch. It still looks like it's going to be very powerful with this tier set. But I also like the how Mountain Thane feels, and this is going to make that feel even Mountain Thane-ier, if that's a word. But there we have it, guys. Those are all the initial tank changes. Took a while, but hopefully this was useful. I would love to know your thoughts on what is going on in patch 11.2. What tank spec are you most excited for? How do you feel about the tier set, bonuses being based around hero trees, and then what other changes are you hoping to see for your spec? Let me know down in the comments below, and make sure you are subscribed to the channel because I'm going to be putting out a ton of PTR content related to tanks, tank gearing, how the dungeons look, all the raid bosses. Of course, we'll be streaming raid testing next week as well, so make sure you check that out here or on my Twitch channel at Tactics. Of course, none of this would be possible without all of the support from my Patreons, so thank you guys so much for that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.